The courtroom was a mix of hushed anticipation and quiet chaos. Reporters lined the back, cameras trained on every angle, microphones hanging above the defense table like vultures waiting for the slightest reaction. For weeks, the narrative had been controlled, rehearsed, and carefully constructed. The defendant was a businessman who had been misled, who had relied on advisors, and whose hands were clean, or so the defense claimed. That carefully maintained story was about to unravel. The morning started like any other federal sentencing hearing. The bailiff called the case, everyone rose, the judge entered, and the courtroom settled into a tense rhythm. The defendant, pale and tense, stood at the defense table, hands clasped, his attorneys beside him, whispering quietly in last-minute preparation. His face betrayed nothing, but the slightest twitch, the shift of a hand, suggested he felt the weight of what was coming. The judge began with procedural reminders, the statutory factors, and the sentencing framework. She moved methodically, her voice calm, precise, devoid of emotion. But as she began to summarize the offense and the defendant's actions, the tension in the room became almost physical. Every eye was fixed on the bench, every ear strained for the words that would determine the trajectory of the defendant's life. Then came the verdict, life without parole. The sound, though just a few words, carried the weight of decades. It wasn't the words themselves that mattered. It was the reality they conveyed. The defendant's knees buckled almost instantly. His body gave way under the sheer impact of what he had just heard. One moment he was standing, the next he was on the floor unconscious. Marshals rushed forward immediately. Within seconds, his pulse was checked and medical assistance was called. The courtroom froze in controlled chaos. No one spoke. Whispers turned to urgent gestures, reporters scrambled, and the judge paused, her composure unshaken but aware that history was unfolding in front of her. The significance of this fainting episode goes beyond theatrics. In federal sentencing, physical reactions to verdicts are rare and tell us more than any written report. This was not a stage display. It was the body responding to the full weight of accountability. For the defendant, the abstract became real. Years of strategy, preparation, and narrative were crushed in a single moment. To understand why this verdict was so impactful, we need to examine the background. The defendant had been accused of orchestrating complex financial schemes, using offshore accounts, shell corporations, and carefully concealed transactions to evade oversight. The defense had argued delegation, distance, and lack of intent. They portrayed him as a high-level executive disconnected from the minutiae, someone who relied on trusted advisors for daily operations. But the prosecution's case told a different story. Evidence, documents, emails, and bank records painted a picture of hands-on involvement, and the recordings introduced into the record left no room for plausible deniability. Each audio clip, each internal communication reinforced the narrative of direct knowledge, deliberate planning, and calculated deception. By the time sentencing arrived, all options for mitigation had been exhausted. The judge, with careful precision, reviewed every statutory factor: nature of the offense, harm to victims, lack of remorse, and the need for deterrence. Guidelines recommended a substantial sentence, but the judge exercised discretion, considering not just the act, but the attitude, awareness, and deliberate nature of the misconduct. The result? Life without parole. For those observing the courtroom, the fainting is more than a dramatic footnote. It is a reflection of the human dimension of justice. Judges impose sentences, but the body reacts in ways the law never anticipates. Legal consequences, when fully internalized, can manifest in panic, collapse, and overwhelming fear. This is a reminder that the abstract principles of deterrence, accountability, and justice have very real psychological effects. The defense faced a dilemma. Attempting to justify the defendant's conduct after such a clear and deliberate series of actions would be nearly impossible. Mitigation arguments, background, charitable acts, family obligations were now secondary to the direct evidence of intent and deliberate orchestration. The jury had already seen the pattern. Now, the judge had codified the consequences. Observers noted the procedural elements. Once the defendant regained consciousness, the court reconvened briefly. The sentence was reaffirmed. No exceptions, no reductions, no allowances for the dramatic collapse. Custody would be immediate. The legal machinery does not pause for theatrics, panic, or fainting. The system moves forward, guided by procedure, precedent, and statute. This case also underscores the broader tension in sentencing high-profile white-collar crime. Judges must weigh the severity of the conduct, the extent of harm, and the message sent to the public. Life without parole for nonviolent offenses is rare, but not unprecedented when the behavior demonstrates deliberate, persistent, and high-impact criminal activity. The ruling signals that financial crime, when executed with full awareness and sophistication, carries consequences as serious as violent offenses. For the public, analysts, and legal observers, the fainting incident is a dramatic entry point into deeper issues: proportionality, deterrence, and accountability. How far should punishment extend when intent is clear, harm is widespread, and the defendant exhibits no genuine remorse? Courts answer this through discretion, guided by law, but the human reactions remind us that the consequences of justice are immediate, tangible, and psychologically profound. Finally, this moment highlights the interplay between narrative and evidence. The defendant's carefully maintained story collapsed under scrutiny. Audio recordings, corroborated documents, and financial trail left no room for reinterpretation. And when the verdict was announced, the human reaction mirrored the legal reality: undeniable accountability, complete and irreversible. As the defendant was escorted from the courtroom, pale and shaken, the media coverage surged. Analysts dissected the implications, focusing on sentencing guidelines, precedent, and potential appeals. For the defendant, the legal fight would continue through appeals, but the psychological impact of the verdict, the collapse in court, would remain etched in memory for those present. This case is a reminder: in federal courtrooms, facts, evidence, and legal standards are immutable. Narrative and strategy may delay consequences, but when the law finally acts, the impact can be both legal and physical. The fainting was not just an emotional reaction, it was the embodiment of accountability, the moment when a lifetime of decisions collided with the consequences prescribed by law. The courtroom has moved forward, the sentence stands, and the defendant now faces the full measure of justice. This is where procedure, discretion, and accountability converge, and where human frailty meets the immutable force of the law.